Hello, hello, and welcome back to the grand finale, the conclusion of this section of the single nutrient series. Today, we're going to be talking about the last, but certainly not the least of the B vitamins. Today, we're talking about cobalamin, vitamin B12. Amy, on that note, do you want to know a quick fun fact about cobalamin?
Yeah, please.
It apparently is, not only is it the only vitamin that has a mineral as part of its structure, but it's also the biggest of the B vitamins.
Wow.
Look, put that in your little back pocket,
Maybe
oh dietitian of mine.
B12.
Yeah, a little pocket full of sunshine, pocket full of B12 there. Yeah, where should we begin? Should we, I think we always struggle with this because admittedly, both of us are probably ever so slightly neurospicy. And also we don't plan for these episodes ahead of time. We just wing it every single time. But should we start with the foods where you would find B12? Should we discuss what the signs and symptoms of deficiency might look like? I don't know. You choose.
Well, I think maybe start what does B12 do for us? I think B12, I feel like people generally know it might help with energy. I feel like people will take B vitamins and B12 being a part of that slew of, it gives us energy. But I think B12, and we talked about folate the last episode in the series, B12 and folate work together for methylation. So it's going to be really important for mental health. And really at anything that involves methylation is those two are going to work together in a number of ways. So I think that that's something to keep in mind. But I think really the core is that it's really important for nervous system, neurological health. So mood, cognition, memory are going to be the things that are going to be so important for B12. And you need your nervous system to be healthy when you're talking about the gut-brain connection.
Totally.
So, we really can't skimp on that. And, I think the other big piece too is we have the neurological side, but we also have oxygen delivery as well. So same thing with folate being very important for preventing anemia. B12 is also important for preventing anemia. So again, you can, that might be in part why energy levels dip a little bit when B12 becomes insufficient. So yeah, I think that those are probably the biggest areas that might be affected if you start dipping in B12 is mental health, nervous system health in general, fatigue, energy, those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with all of those things. And I think that is what B12 is most known for. Again, you get the 5-hour energy shots or the vitamin waters or the whatever. And even if you go into cash-based lab places, any lab test now, you'll see they have posters and banners for B12 shots and stuff. Because I think the general public does have some understanding that B12 is associated with energy. It's not necessarily going to energize you in the same way that caffeine would. But if you are deficient in that vitamin and then you suddenly are no longer deficient in it, then you are going to feel a surge of energy. Kind of like if you're iron deficient and then you start taking iron and you actually have iron for once, you're going to be whoa, I could run a marathon. This is great.
Right.
But I think that that's an important distinction to make with the energy conversation because Lord knows everybody, myself included, would love to have more energy or more mental clarity or both. And this part of the conversation reminds me a little bit about vitamin C. Vitamin C can help prevent or reduce the instances of colds and flus and upper respiratory infections, but only if you were deficient in vitamin C in the first place. If you give a population of people vitamin C and they already were getting enough to begin with, then giving them extra vitamin C really isn't going to prevent colds and flus in that group of people. And I feel again, it's kind of the same way with B12. If you take people who were doing fine with their B12 status to begin with, and then you just give them a bunch of B12, they're probably not going to get energy from it.
Right.
But if they were deficient, then certainly they would. And I think you summarized it well. B12 is needed for energy metabolism, in the Krebs cycle, for example, along with a lot of the other B vitamins.
Yeah.
It also needed to make red blood cells. And that's why you get a particular flavor of anemia when you're deficient in either folate or B12. And it's where the cells are actually bigger, but they're not able to perform their job as well. So you'll see like, red blood cells go down, hemoglobin goes down, but then some of the other markers like MCV, MCHC, those guys will all start to go up. And yeah, so B12 is big for that. And Lord knows you need oxygen delivery and good red blood cell production to have energy and get oxygen to your tissues. I think the only other thing that I would throw into the mix, aside from what you said, in the sense of like energy production, nervous system health, and like nervous system kind of symptomology, I think also I would guess that any process in the body that's really energy intensive is going to be compromised in B12 deficiency. So it kind of reminds me of our conversation many moons ago with Thomas Easley, where we were talking about the proton pumps in the stomach and how pushing hydrogen ions against that strong of a gradient to produce stomach acid is really, 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 really energy intensive. And parietal cells have a lot of mitochondria for that reason. And so similarly, if you're not getting enough oxygen to the parietal cells because you're starting to tip towards like a megaloblastic anemia situation, I think that would probably compromise things like stomach acid production as well, even though you don't necessarily need B12 for the reaction itself. It's more like it's a downstream consequence of the lack of oxygen delivery.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and a good point. One other thing, again, reviewing my Chris Masterjohn info, like I always do.
We sound like such fangirls, like between Chris Masterjohn and like Sarah Ballantyne.
I feel like I like to pull out at least a couple things that he said. He was talking about how not getting enough B12 actually leads to like B5 not being able to be used properly. And that can also lead to a lot more neurological symptoms as well. So I think it's just interesting him pulling in some of these other nutrients and like their synergy, which I always think it's good to highlight those things because I think it's very easy, like you were saying before, to maybe boil something down to like one nutrient. It's this simple. I just have a B12 deficiency and that's why my energy is low. Or it's this thing. And it's like, oh, in part it could be that. But a lot of these nutrients are interacting. So, it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it too, like if you have a diet that is devoid of a particular nutrient, that kind of points a finger at a problem with the diet, maybe more broadly, right? Like if you're deficient in B12 because you never eat meat or seafood, then maybe there are other deficiencies like zinc or vitamin A or omega-3s or something else that you should be concerned with as well. It might not just be a single solitary nutrient deficiency, but it could be kind of like hinting at a broader problem with the diet or with somebody's health. But yeah, I think that's a valid point. Another one too, before I forget this, is so a lot of us have had a marker called homocysteine drawn on labs, and you can get this from Quest, Kaiser, LabCorp, at hospitals, they'll run it, and it's kind of classically described as an inflammatory marker, and it is associated with inflammation when it's higher, and higher levels of homocysteine are associated with things like dementia and heart disease, and that's why we try to keep it low, or lower, I should say. But you need B12 and folate to convert homocysteine into methionine and kind of make that roundy round go around. And so it's very important for homocysteine purposes. So it could also be sort of, I don't want to say indirectly linked, but you could also think of B12 deficiency causing its own flavor of maybe cardiovascular dysfunction or inflammation, because you would get this buildup of homocysteine, which is at the end of the day kind of an inflammatory molecule.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had a patient not that long ago with pretty high homocysteine. Might have been like close to 15. It was on the higher end. So we were kind of trying to decipher what was happening there. But yeah, that's a really good point too. And could be an indicator. Do you want to talk a little bit about other labs too? We could kind of go into that.
Yeah, and maybe briefly on the homocysteine thing too, while we're on this topic, is that when I see high homocysteine, I think of a couple of things. So it could be a B vitamin deficiency. And oftentimes you just put somebody on like a decent multivitamin or a decent, B complex, and the problem resolves right away.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I've seen is sometimes high homocysteine is because the person is eating too much animal-based protein. So they're getting a shit ton of methionine in their diet. And it's like, you can only make that cycle go round and round so many times before you're going to deplete the nutrients needed or before you're going to like overwhelm your body's ability to process that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen some people where they're already doing a B complex or they're already doing a really good multi, but they're like paleo, leaning a little bit more carnivore because that's what's trendy and sexy right now. And actually, a friend of mine a couple years ago, this came up in a conversation with a friend, and that ended up being the case for him. But no, the functional provider couldn't figure it out. They kept switching the B complex or the multivitamin. And then I just pointed out like, dude, you kind of eat a lot of meat, don't you?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to ease up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think, again, it's kind of interesting too with the B12 markers because there's like B12 serum and then there's methylmalonic acid. And, I found when I was going to doctors that it was kind of more tricky for them to run methylmalonic acid. Like it wasn't a common one. Not that I think it's that hard for them to run. I just maybe like the insurance was weird. It was going to cost more. So they were sort of not preferential of running that marker. But I think you could still deduce some interesting things off serum B12. And again, I think it's interesting too because I think that you can kind of consider a couple things based off where your serum B12 is falling. And I think B12's, relatively speaking, something that's not too risky to try as well to like see if it helps. It's not really something where I'd be like, oh, it's going to build up or, there's toxicity to it. Like usually you're going to be able to just pee it out if you're in excess. We can really only take in so much. That's why it's important, it being water soluble, to eat it daily. It's not like something you can really, make up for by eating tons of liver or something one day a week and then no B12 the rest of the week. You do want to be eating it fairly regularly. But the point being is, if your labs are a little bit low, you could certainly try to increase it a bit and see if it makes you feel a little bit better. I don't really think it's that risky for you to try it.
Yeah, no harm, no foul.
Right.
It's not like, honestly, like sometimes people get prescribed a prescription antibiotic for hypothesized SIBO, and it's very nonchalant and very like, oh, it might be SIBO, so let's do this. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
That's kind of risky business to go into if you're not absolutely certain that the person needs an antibiotic, right?
At least as a first step. Like there's other steps.
Yeah.
Like, even if you were pretty confident that someone has some microbial issues, like, oh, maybe try something a little bit less aggressive than like taking 2 antibiotics at one time to clear it out.
First do no harm.
Right.
Like, right. But you're right. B12 is usually really well tolerated. It's cheap and effective and safe enough that you could kind of give it without much ill consequence. I mean, maybe the people who are the super sensitive Sallys of the universe who don't do well on like methylated stuff could maybe react funny if they took like a methyl B12 or a methyl something or other. So maybe that is one area of concern. But even for those people, it'll do goofy things to your neurology and give you bizarro symptoms. Like, I had one lady, I gave her a methylated multivitamin, and I actually was suspicious that this might happen. Like, she struck me as a sensitive Sally type. So I told her, I was like, you clearly need B vitamins, but I also don't know if you're going to tolerate this type very well. So I actually brought my own bottle of vitamins from home. And I cracked open my own bottle and I just gave her one capsule and was like, you're going to take this home. And you're going to tell your husband to keep his eye out for anything weird. And then you report back to me next time. And she, I kid you not, I don't know if I ever told you the story. She said, well, you were right. She was packing for a 3-day weekend with some friends. They were going to the Outer Banks to the beach. She took the multi. She started packing. She totally zoned out and like kind of came to, and it was like 2 hours later, and she looked down at her suitcase and realized that she had packed like 32 pairs of underwear and a single t-shirt for this 3-day trip. And that's all she had packed. And she was like, whoa, what happened? So it really seemed to like alter her mental faculties. But again, it was a matter of like an hour or two. And then she snapped out of it and was like, that was freaking weird.
Yeah.
And then she moved on with her life. So even in the grand scheme of things, again, relatively low risk to try.
Yeah.
And certainly if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, I think it would be worth checking your blood level every now and then and kind of tailoring your supplementation accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the key. And one of the things maybe to point out, you know, in terms of being vegetarian or vegan, a lot of times people will say, and we probably have talked about this before, where they'll say like, hey, I went vegan and then felt great for, you know, a year or something like that. But B12 is one of those things that can just start kind of gradually getting depleted across time. You're not going to really notice effects right away. So, you know, I think sometimes in those situations, and most of the time I will say that vegans and vegetarians are aware of B12, like that is one of the nutrients, but it's still something I would monitor because I've definitely had vegans and vegetarians with low B12, even if they're supplementing. So, you know, I do think it's something to really, like you said, keep in mind if you're vegan and vegetarian, and know too that like if you felt fine for a couple months, not taking it it's not an indicator. I would keep taking it because you're going to deplete your stores too. And like I said, you can't just like maybe take a big bulk of B12 and then like top off. You have to kind of keep taking it regularly to make sure that you're, you know, accumulating a little bit and storing a little bit while also maintaining what you need daily.
So to kind of paint an example here, you wouldn't want to be like a strict vegetarian or a strict vegan and then just say, oh, it's okay, I'll just do a B12 shot once a month and I'm going to be good. Like that's not going to be the best for getting this nutrient. Right. And I'm glad you brought up the idea of storage because there is going to be at least a teeny bit of storage for most nutrients in the body. I didn't find any citation as far as like how much storage capacity we have for B12, but I know for some of the other B vitamins we covered in the series, sort of the consensus that I got from those other B vitamins, which are also water soluble, is that you can store enough that you're not going to show signs of blatant deficiency for probably a few weeks or maybe even a month or two. And you know, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say too, Chris Masterjohn actually did put some of this stuff. Of course he would, because he's so thorough. He was saying that you could actually store 30 years of B12, but like that would take years and years to accumulate, basically, was his take on it. And he thinks that it's probably in part like an evolutionary thing because, you know, as we age, we don't absorb as much.
And our stomach acid goes down.
Yeah. So he was saying even at like a young age, making sure you're eating enough B12 so that when you do age and, you know, maybe you have more gastritis or other issues that kind of come up that can affect the absorption. But he was saying too, like he was giving some examples of, you know, sometimes in Christianity, people will do like fasts. Like I think you've heard, you might have, I forget what they're called. There's a specific name for them, but like basically like plant-based fasting for periods of time. And he said you could actually do those for usually like 4 months and be pretty fine. But things will kind of start to slowly affect you like once you start getting a little bit beyond that.
That makes sense.
And you might not even have crazy outright symptoms. That's why it's hard. It creeps up on you. It's very hard, some of these nutritional things, because it's not like a light switch flips when you go vegan or vegetarian.
It's not the smack in the face that we all think it will be.
It's like, oh, I'm B12 deficient. How like my neurology's all messed up, just like a snap.
Like you said, some of the deficiency symptoms might not even be related to this particular vitamin. It might be affecting like folate or B5 or B6 or some of the other nutrients. So it's kind of this cascading domino effect too.
Yeah, he mentions another thing that was interesting, that like folate also can mask B12 deficiency, which is another thing to keep in mind. Like if you are taking folate for some reason.
Like the people I've seen who take 5 milligrams of folate every goddamn day of their life. That's a bad idea.
Maybe you're taking like a prenatal that's like heavily folate based or something and less B12. Usually they're going to have some B12, but like, you know what I mean? I don't know. Some situation like that. Particularly,
I'm getting snarky here, but I have genuinely seen people who kind of make their own protocol of sorts. And instead of having like a multi-product or a B-complex product, they will have a separate supplement for every single nutrient. Yep. And I've seen flavors of that. And I've seen other people who were just told that they have MTHFR and they'd better take this because. But I've seen quite a lot of people over the years who are taking a capsule of folate every day, but it's like, 1 milligram or 5 milligrams, some huge astronomical amount of methylfolate.
Yeah.
And they just have been taking it because, again, it's either part of their protocol and they think it's healthy, or they were told to because they have the dreaded MTHFR.
Yeah.
But you're right. Another tangentially related thing that I want to bring up too, that we mentioned in the folate episode, is this idea of folate trapping. And basically, if you have adequate folate, but you don't have enough B12 to kind of like match that activity, because there's a step in the methylation cycle and the homocysteine cycle where you're passing methyl groups from one to the other. And if you don't have both the giver and the taker in that relationship, things can go awry. And basically, they call it a folate trap because folate gets trapped in an unusable form, and then you don't have enough B12 to really process it. So you can start getting signs of folate deficiency, not because you're actually deficient in folate, but because you don't have enough B12 to help you like process and activate your folate.
Right.
So that's a consideration too.
No, it's totally true. And again, I think again, the core of it is, I think a lot of people do okay with getting B12 intake in. I think that where you're going to run into issues is if you are more plant-based, you're going to struggle to get B12 in. And so I think that's probably the biggest risk factor. Risk factor for B12 deficiency is just like poor intake. But I also think it is a nutrient where you could run into some absorption issues for a variety of reasons. Some of them are going to be more rare, like something like pernicious anemia, where your body's sort of attacking the cells in the stomach, or even any sort of form of autoimmune gastritis. That's really going to potentially affect your B12 absorption. And we work with a number of people with gastritis, whether it's autoimmune or not. And I'm actually surprised how many people that I've seen with autoimmune gastritis where we've kind of found it.
It's not uncommon.
It's not common. And I feel like a lot of people with a lot of my patients were a little freaked out to test for it because they're like, wait, what? Like my gastritis could be autoimmune, which I get the apprehension, but most of them, like, I feel like their outcomes were pretty good as long as they could kind of knew what to do, and that this was approaching it more from a chronic lens versus just like an acute lens is helpful. But yeah, I mean, we've dealt with our fair share of gastritis, and that's gonna play a role. Anything like H. pylori is going to play a role. And I don't necessarily mean the GI map based H. pylori infections. I mean like the truly legit ones. In my opinion, that test is not great at
I share the same opinion
at pinpointing H. pylori infections. So
may I say something though, really quick?
Yes.
Because you're onto something, but you're dancing around it and you haven't really named the thing yet.
Okay.
So the commonality, the problem with everything that you're starting to circle around is low stomach acid.
Yep.
And so this is going to be an issue potentially with people who take prolonged use of proton pump inhibitor medication, gastritis, whether it's autoimmune or not, gastritis, if it's, yeah.
Anything.
And the thing is, you need stomach acid to activate intrinsic factor, and you need intrinsic factor to absorb your B12. And in pernicious anemia, where, for example, or like the autoimmune gastritis, the issue is that your immune system is attacking the cells that make stomach acid. So it's not so much the autoimmunity in and of itself, in that initial phase at least, that's the problem. It's that you start losing capacity to make stomach acid. And I've actually caught a number of autoimmune gastritis, like parietal antibody cases when I've done blood work on people. But the thing is, I think if you catch it at the stage of just gastritis symptoms and you're not yet deficient in iron or B12, I think that the outcomes can be really, really good because you're catching it at its earliest possible stage. You're catching the autoimmunity, you're catching the hypochlorhydria, and now you just know, okay, my body might struggle with making stomach acid indefinitely because this is a chronic autoimmune condition. It is what it is. And you might just know that you want to take apple cider vinegar or bitters or betaine HCl, and you might want that to be a strategy that you employ for the rest of your life, right? Versus run-of-the-mill IBS, run-of-the-mill SIBO, run-of-the-mill bloating kind of stuff. When people do benefit from betaine HCl or bitters, they could usually get away with taking it for like a couple of months, and then you phase it out, and then hooray, your body can make it on its own. You're swell, you're okay now. And that's the thing that I like to keep in mind and why I would consider running the labs. It's not scary doom and gloom. It's just like, it could be helpful to know, do you need to be thinking about stomach acid adequacy? And do you want to consider using these things like temporarily or maybe for the rest of your life? And in somebody like that, I think it's prudent to test your iron and your B12 at least once a year. I mean, truthfully, I think that's prudent for most people to do, but especially if you know you have that autoimmune condition, then I think it's super, in like a CBC, so you get a glimpse of your red blood cells. I think it just becomes that much more important to do that monitoring when you know that you have that autoimmunity. But yeah, the underpinning is the stomach acid.
Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. You're totally correct. I think too, it's interesting to me because I feel like just, as an aside, there's a lot of people that I work with gastritis that don't have autoimmune gastritis too. And I always just think like when someone has more chronic gastritis, like what is preventing that from healing? Because like typically if you don't have autoimmune gastritis necessarily, and even if you do, like you can still heal the tissue, but it might make sense that there's more long-standing issues. But I do find that sometimes with like the really stubborn gastritis cases, that more often than not, it's an overall like fuel issue, meaning like it still comes down to like undereating, and like giving the resources needed to heal that tissue up is just not present. But like there's been so many people that I've worked with chronic gastritis from, in my opinion, likely undereating, and it gets better once fuel and everything kind of improves.
That makes sense. Like I don't remember what episode it was because we have a million of them now, but there was an episode sometime back where you brought up, like in dietetic school, they teach you that there are different nutrient requirements for burn victims. And like you need a lot more calories, for example, because it takes just so much energy and so many resources to heal the skin, the tissue. Yeah. And so you could almost kind of think like gastritis can feel like a sunburn on the inside. Right. So it sort of stands logically that if you're trying to heal like a really bad or a chronic case of gastritis, or if you're trying to heal like, profound leaky gut kind, like I'm thinking celiac disease, Crohn's disease, like true malabsorptive disorders, if you're trying to heal tissue that's that big and that important and coming into contact with that many, antigens and molecules on a day-to-day basis, you might need a lot of fuel to accomplish that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Now where we were, I feel like we've gotten onto a good sidebar, but we were at B12. We talked about absorption being important.
Yeah.
So that's where we kind of were.
May I pick up where I think we were still kind of hovering?
Yes.
So again, you brought up pernicious anemia and like autoimmune gastritis, which I think is great, and the low stomach acid piece. I just alluded to, but I didn't directly say, if you have a true malabsorptive medical condition like celiac disease or Crohn's disease, or if you've had like a gastric bypass or a Roux-en-Y, or if you've had part of your bowel removed, those sorts of things can also make you more prone to B12 deficiency. So keep that in mind too. Another point, and this is the part of the episode where I pull open my book. Hold on, like a dork. Okay. So it's the same book I reference every single time. We all know this by now. So the things that they bring up for deficiency, I think, have a lot of overlap with what we're talking about. So they bring up inadequate intake, right? Like that's it until proven otherwise. Do not go to the malabsorptive thing. Don't jump to the gastritis thing. Like don't jump to any of these things until you've proven with nutrition tracking, like Chronometer or something similar, that you actually eat enough of the damn stuff.
Right.
So inadequate intake, they also mention impaired pancreatic exocrine function, like EPI. And it says that would decrease the pH of the intestinal tract and impairs the release of vitamin B12 from our proteins. So that'll impair digestion. They also mention impaired gastric function and hypochlorhydria. They mention impaired intestinal function like celiac disease or Crohn's disease. And then they bring up competition in the sense of people with a parasitic infection like tapeworms might develop a B12 deficiency because the parasite is using it and basically gobbling it up. Now, that being said, I remember I worked with somebody once and she was told that she had a B12 deficiency because her SIBO was gobbling it up and her SIBO was causing the B12 deficiency. And I just wanted to hover on that one for a quick moment. We've mentioned this in other episodes before, but SIBO, as it was diagnosed years ago, I'm talking like the 1980s, 1990s, and early part of the 2000s, that was a totally different thing compared to quote unquote SIBO that is diagnosed in the last, say, 10 years or so. Like since we've had this renaissance of interest in SIBO and everybody and their freaking brother is getting diagnosed with SIBO and we're using faulty breath testing, the bar is so much lower for where we're at right now to get this quote unquote diagnosis. And I'm being flippant and I'm saying quote unquote diagnosis because I think what we're labeling as SIBO now should be labeled something entirely different.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation we've had and that's a conversation for another day. But I'm talking like, to be diagnosed with SIBO now, you need something like 1 × 10 to the third power of bacteria, like colony forming units per ml of fluid. So 1 × 10 to the third. Back in the day, it was 1 × 10 to the 7th, 8th, 9th, much higher. So we're talking like 10,000 or 100,000 times the amount of bacteria that we're currently seeing in SIBO patients today. So if you were diagnosed with SIBO in the 80s, 90s, or earliest part of the 2000s, you probably could have genuine bona fide B12 deficiency from that. And they even saw some anemia from that. If you're diagnosed with SIBO, let's say since 2010, 2015, if you've been diagnosed with SIBO in recent years, I can almost guarantee that you don't have a B12 deficiency because of the variation of SIBO that you've been told you have.
Right. It's more likely some of the other stuff we're talking about. Intake, low stomach acid maybe could be a factor for a decent amount of our patients.
Low stomach acid is pretty common.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, how many people have you worked with who have EPI, like diagnosed, confirmed exocrine pancreatic insufficiency? I've seen a lot of people where it comes up and they're like, oh yeah, my my fecal elastase was 129, and they may or may not be taking enzymes to try to do anything about that because maybe the enzymes helped, maybe they didn't help.
Right.
So, I think there's a lot of bigger players at play to go to before you jump to the assumption that the SIBO is stealing your nutrients.
Yes, I agree. I'm glad you brought that up. I was like in my head buckling my seatbelt for what you were going to say in a good way. Like,
well, and we've done episodes at this point now, right? Like we have one that we titled Breaking Up with SIBO. We've done episodes on the accuracy of the SIBO breath testing. And briefly, I'll just share, we've talked about this here, but I think SIBO, as it's diagnosed nowadays, should be relabeled as SIMD, SIMD, small intestinal microbial dysbiosis.
Yep.
And that kind of opens the floor for not only bacteria, but also archaea and yeast and God knows what else is in there.
It's like so much clearer than being like, oh no, this is emo now. And this is like, we're kind of creating, and again, it's just the diagnostic criteria is so different and not as connected to the symptoms too. The past symptoms. So like the actual true deficiencies and those sorts of things. So it's a very confusing world at this point because they're not the same thing.
No. And again, like overgrowth heavily implies almost like a quasi-infection, right?
Right. That
you need to kill it, you need to starve it. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, frankly. Versus if you kind of frame it out the get-go as small intestinal microbial dysbiosis, like when we talk about dysbiosis, we can acknowledge that part of a dysbiosis protocol might involve killing back or trimming back unwanted bad guys.
Right.
Right? Like people were using oregano oil and berberine and all of this stuff for dysbiosis long before SIBO came around. Like, it's not like people started manufacturing oregano oil the day that SIBO hit the mainstream. But it's like when you're working through the lens of dysbiosis, you have an understanding that nurturing the good guys is a part of that. And it's not purely kill, 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 starve, starve, starve. And I feel like that's what's missing from the SIBO conversation is like, it's very much treated like an infection when in fact it's not one.
Right.
But
very true.
Anyhow, I guess rambling point. If you've been diagnosed with SIBO in the last 10 or 15 years, chances are your B12 deficiency is not because of that. It almost always inadequate intake until proven otherwise, or maybe something like low stomach acid or epi. So get those things looked at, or really like critically look at those things first before you make that jump. And I wish more practitioners knew that too.
Yes.
I had, it's funny. We got into this episode and I thought, oh, this will be a pretty concise episode. And that's always the kiss of death for us. If I think, oh, this is going to be a shorty, then it ends up being like this dissertation length thing. I have another little nugget that I'd like to share for a moment, if that's okay. Yeah. And then I have a bigger thing that might end up being the finale of the episode because it's maybe a little bit more of like a conversation. So I had this quote pulled from a research article, basically looking at the roles of B vitamins and the microbiome. And they said cobalamin and its derivatives determine not only microbial fitness, but also microbial activity, including pathogenicity in the host. Cobalamin also acts as an immunomodulator to promote cellular immunity. These results indicated that luminal, meaning like inside the intestine, luminal cobalamin and the availability of its analogs can modulate the luminal infection. So that was interesting to me. Like, it's not just you who needs B12. Your microbes also need B12. And granted, some of them can produce B12, but you might want to feed them a little bit. You might want to throw the dog a bone occasionally and make sure that your microbes are getting the nutrients that they need too.
Right. I feel like that's always looked at in a negative light in the SIBO space. Like, oh, microbes can eat B12? It's like, well, yeah. Some of the microbes that you want are going to eat B12.
Well, and that's normal. Like the other way to frame it is it's not that they're eating or stealing the B12. It's just they need it too. And that goes for a lot of healthy bacteria and good bacteria.
Right.
I will say, and this actually might segue into the thing that I wanted to bring up. So I don't know if you've seen cases like this. I've seen a couple. It's not a common thing, but it is out there. Have you seen somebody where their serum B12 is elevated, but they are not taking any sort of supplementation and they're not doing B12 injections?
I have.
Okay. So that has been a bit of a stumper for a lot of people. And sometimes that comes up in functional forums and SIBO forums and whatnot. I don't know if you want to kind of start with like whatever opinion you have on that topic, or if you want me to roll into a couple of the things that I had on my radar.
Yeah, you can go ahead and roll in and then I can give you sort of my thoughts.
You can interject.
Yeah, I can interject here or there.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't say I have strong opinions on my theories, but I'd be curious what you had to say.
Yeah, okay. And again, like I thought this could be sort of a fun finale of sorts because it is oftentimes a head scratcher. Okay, so elevated B12 on blood work in the absence of supplementation. First, the lowest hanging fruit is look for unknown sources of B12 supplements in your diet and in your supplements. Sometimes people will be like, I don't know why the B12 is elevated, but then they're taking a multivitamin.
Or like a powder or something that has...
Bingo. Yep. Protein powders, some of them function like a multivitamin in and of themselves. So if you get like a protein powder or a detox powder, I'm picturing like, Clearvite or something like that. If you do any sort of like a cleanse or a shake or an Herbalife, this and that, sometimes it'll be snuck into a product. So like you might get a hair, skin, and nails formula and you might be aware that it has biotin in it, but you didn't notice that it has a little bit of B12 as well. So just like double check anything, supplement or quasi-supplement, fiber products maybe even, but just double check and make sure that you're really truly not taking B12 supplements. Once you get through that phase of it, so okay, you've confirmed that you are not taking any sort of supplements, then at that point, you could start suspecting that you have B12 in your blood, but it's maybe not getting into the cells in the way that it should, right? So there's like a transport issue potentially. Yeah. So you're absorbing it because it made it into your bloodstream and out of the gut. So the absorption is there, but the utilization is maybe not there and it's getting trapped, so to speak, in the bloodstream. Couple of things. There are genetic variances, SNPs, kind of like MTHFR, but there are SNPs associated with B12 transporter proteins. So sometimes it's just a matter of switching the type of B12 that you're taking. So like and let me look actually, because I think I wrote this down. Hold on. So theoretically, and I don't have like specific citations on this, I just had notes from years ago. Theoretically, hydroxycobalamin could be best for people who have TCN1 SNPs. And theoretically, adenosylcobalamin might be best for people who have TCN2 SNPs. So if you've ever done like a 23andMe or anything like that, you could look up those TCN1, TCN2 transporters, see if you have a SNP and just make a change there. TCN1 is basically a protein that's in the stomach, and TCN2 is in the blood, and maybe the enterocytes, but they're both B12 transporter proteins. So sometimes it's a matter of just picking the right form of B12 so that it actually gets in. I found a really interesting post some years ago that I saved from like a clinical Facebook group, so take it with a grain of salt. But apparently lithium might aid in B12 transport.
Interesting.
And there have been some cases where people just add a little bit of like lithium orotate or some sort of lithium supplement, and then the B12 kind of corrects itself. So I thought that was really, really interesting. The other piece of it, so if you go through and you double check and you triple check that you're really not taking a B12 supplement, and maybe also check that you're not taking a ton of like nutritional yeast and stuff like that. That could be either a really rich source of B12 or fortified potentially. Yeah. Do your due diligence there. If it's out of the LabCorp range or the Quest range, but it's not off the charts high, I would maybe think a little bit more along the lines of like genetic variations, and maybe one form would be more suited for you, or maybe you just need a little bit of lithium to like help pull that into the cells. If those don't work, or if the level is super duper duper high, like, you know, the lab gave up, they're not even going to quantify it. LabCorp just says, it's above 2,000. We don't even know. If it's that high, or if these other things don't work, then unfortunately you have to start thinking of bigger, hairy, scary things like renal disease, liver disease, or possibly even cancer. And there was at least like one paper, for example, that I found on the topic said high or supraphysiologic serum B12 levels without supplementation have been associated with many pathological conditions, including renal failure, hematological disorders, cancer, and hepatic and autoimmune diseases. All conditions may show elevated concentrations of B12 transport proteins. In addition, in liver disease, there might be an increased release of B12 due to basically like the cells breaking apart, lysis of the cells, and or reduced B12 clearance. Thus, a high or supraphysiologic serum B12 concentration without supplementation could be useful as a diagnostic marker for a severe underlying disease. Now, again, I wouldn't jump to that right away, especially if your B12 levels are at least quantifiable by the lab. Like if LabCorp says, hey, you're at 1401, and they at least are giving you a measurement for it, you're not like above the LabCorp range of what they're able to quantify and detect, then I would probably start more with like fiddling with the type of B12 or maybe trying lithium and retesting. But, you know, it needs to be said that I think in the functional world, and I was reading through some of the functional forums and refreshing my memory on the consensus on this before this episode. Unfortunately, when people have brought this to the groups and said like, hey, I have a patient with these labs, why do you think their B12 is so high? Very frequently, the two knee-jerk reactions that I see in those functional medicine Facebook groups is methylation or it's SIBO. And again, we just knocked down the SIBO hypothesis. That's probably not it. But also like, you know, the people who got super into the Ben Lynch stuff 10, 15 years ago, and they're super swooned by it. And they're doing, you know, they're doing SNP testing on every person under the sun. They maybe have some blinders on clinically, and they might potentially miss a really serious underlying disease like cancer. And that would be very sad. So just have that as a possibility in the very back of your mind.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think for me in the past, I've sort of the more prominent thing that I think I remember reading about is the liver stuff. Like, oh, there's liver disease if it's high, or liver dysfunction in some way. I think you're right. Probably more often than not, people are taking some B12 that they're not aware of somewhere. I mean, most of our patients are taking so many supplements, like it's hard to keep track of them. But it is interesting, the idea of like, not being able to utilize the B12 very well based on some SNPs. But yeah, and I would say too, like if you are taking B12 and you get lab work done, they should be high. You know, your B12 is usually going to be high. So I know we started this conversation that way, but you know, maybe people forgot in the beginning.
Yeah.
So don't panic if you're taking
B12 or if you're getting injections, it's going to be high.
Right. Just wanted to make sure to specify that at the end. So
yeah, what we were just talking about is people who have high B12 on blood work in the absence of supplementation.
Yeah.
That's a different thing.
Yes.
Yeah. But okay, should we do sort of an executive summary here at the end of the episode?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, pop quiz, Amy. Who is at risk of B12 deficiency?
People that are vegan or vegetarian, if you take PPIs, antacids, if you have if you have a true H. pylori infection or autoimmune gastritis or anything kind of along those lines, I think you could be someone that's more has a higher risk of deficiency. Did I cover those bases? I'm trying to think of.
Well, and think a little further down. So we got
and low stomach acid issues in general.
And then keep going.
Okay, and people with like bigger digestive disorders, truly malabsorptive disorders like Crohn's, that sort of stuff, celiac.
And exocrine pancreatic insufficiency.
Yep.
Epi. Yep. And we danced around this, but it's worth saying here at the end that the reason why vegetarian and vegan eaters are at higher risk is because B12 is almost exclusively found in animal
correct
meat. So, especially red meat, shellfish, like bivalves have quite a lot of B12, like mussels and clams and that sort of thing. And then to a lesser but still significant amount, you can find B12 in things like eggs. So really, you'll notice that was pretty much all animal flesh that I rattled off there.
Right.
I think nutritional yeast is really the only plant-based thing that you're going to find B12 in. So yeah, you need to be mindful of it if you're a plant-based eater for that reason.
Right. And make sure the nutritional yeast is fortified, because I don't think the unfortified ones have B12 in them.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I found we used to use a lot of nutritional yeast because I couldn't do dairy for many years.
Yeah.
And so we would use it for like cheesy things.
Yeah.
I feel like we used to get the one, it was in like a canister, yay big. It was like a yellow, blue, and white label. I forget what the brand was, but we used that for a lot of years. And then I started getting a little twitchy because I didn't like some of the forms that they fortify with, like cyanocobalamin.
Yeah.
Which might have not been that concerning in retrospect, but I remember finding a nutritional yeast that wasn't fortified, but it still claimed to have really high levels of everything on the label. So I truly don't know. I keep meaning to look into that and see, is it really the fortification that bestows all of those vitamins in there?
Let's see if I
or
can
is
search.
it, intrinsic to the nutritional yeast itself?
I couldn't remember if I heard about that in Chris Masterjohn's or not, but I just searched it, and it does say nutritional yeast does not contain B12 unless fortified.
Okay.
Any other vegan foods claim to have B12 do not unless fortified.
Okay.
The vegan sources of B12 also contain B12 antagonists. I don't know.
Okay. Well, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, because I wasn't sure off the top of my head. So then it makes me wonder if that product really was fortified or if they fudged the numbers on that nutrition label for whatever brand it happened to be.
Who knows?
But that's okay. That's okay because I can eat dairy now, so I'm much less reliant on nutritional yeast in my diet overall. I can enjoy real cheese.
Yes. Nutritional yeast is also very nutritionally... it's high in a lot of nutrients other than B12, though.
Yeah.
So enjoy it if you do like it.
Basically, all the
just not
vitamins.
a good B12 source.
Again, unless it's fortified. In which case, sure. And that's the thing too. Is like if you eat all the things, I would rather you get the B12 from foods that naturally contain it, and it doesn't have to be fortified. So like a steak or clams or something, but if you're a vegetarian, you're going to have to take a supplement one way or another. Like it almost doesn't matter to me if you get that supplement from a fortified food or if you get that supplement in a pill form.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's still just a supplement, really. So
agreed.
That's, worth mentioning too. But okay, so we covered the people who are at risk. We covered the foods where you could find B12. And you want to just do a quick recap of some of the symptoms you might expect or some of the body parts that would be negatively affected if you were deficient in this nutrient?
Yeah, I mean, I think your neurology or just like mental health would be affected. So mood changes. I think that cognition, so like how your ability to think straight, your memory is going to be affected. Sometimes people will get like tingling, like if they do experience B12 symptoms, they'll get some tingling. You might get low energy, dizziness, that sort of stuff from being a little anemic if it starts getting to that level. and some fatigue. Those would probably be like the bigger ones, which they're kind of broad symptoms too. So
very non-specific. You can be fatigued for a million reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, it is an easy one to run, like a B12, you know.
And even like most normal doctors, like primary care doctors, would be willing to run a B12 test if you just tell them, hey, I'm more tired than I feel like I should be.
Right.
Like that's pretty straightforward. Again, you mentioned that they might not be willing to run methylmalonic acid, but like, I don't know if everybody needs that necessarily. At least do the cursory, you know, first swoop with the primary care and test serum B12 and just see what comes of it before you start thinking about fancier labs. I actually like, when I was doing more blood work on people, I would frequently do methylmalonic acid, but I would do it in a urine test from LabCorp. Mm-hmm. And that way I figured I could spare the person another tube or half a tube of blood.
Right.
Like the less blood I take out of them, the better. But that way I was getting methylmalonic acid and I was also sparing them a little bit of blood. So that's how I would frequently test it, but probably not a lot of normal doctors are going to be willing to order that one.
Yeah.
It's going to feel a little bit more obscure to them. So, you know, make do with B12 serum. It's fine. And then one last thing. The squirrel brain kicks in for one more little factoid as we wrap up here. Also, just keep in mind that certain medications can either deplete your B12, like make you kind of burn through it faster, like increase your need for B12, or can inhibit absorption. So one of the more famous ones is metformin, which is used for type 2 diabetes. Metformin can deplete your B12. And you got to keep an eye out for that medication. But also I would consider things like hormonal birth control pills. Again, we mentioned PPIs or any sort of acid suppressant. I don't know if a binder like cholestyramine could maybe muck with that. And I don't know what others, but if you're taking any prescription medications and you're B12 deficient, it would be very worth your while to do just a quick Google search and see what nutrients are depleted by the medication that you're taking.
Right. For sure.
So. All right, my dear. I think that's a wrap. Are we calling it there?
Yeah.
A wrap on the B vitamin section of the single nutrient series.
Right.
OMG. We have to do a little bit of noodling as to what nutrient we do next. I'm kind of leaning towards vitamin C. Because we'll kind of finish out the water-soluble vitamins, and then we could perhaps pivot to the fat-soluble vitamins that will feel really apropos for the winter months when we're all getting the sniffles and we need to focus more on vitamin D and vitamin A anyway. So maybe we'll do those next, and then we'll start thinking about minerals. But that's a ways away, so we're not going to worry about it quite yet. But methinketh vitamin C is our next target on this single nutrient series, people. So until then, we will see you for the next episode. Do something nice for your vagus nerve. Do something nice for your digestion, and we will see you very soon.